Thanks, Jen. We wish it was, but sometimes love's not enough. His name was Gary, and he was my whole life. Ours was a Hollywood love story. We worked in Hollywood, we lived in Hollywood. We were supposed to have a happily ever after. And then in 1998, he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease. I was his caregiver for 3 years. I don't have to stand here and describe to you what that role entails. You all know. What I would like to look at right now is who we are as co-survivors. And I want to put a face to the co-survivors. So I'm going to ask the co-survivors in the room to please stand for just one moment. As you look around the room and you see those faces, as you think of co-survivors who couldn't be here today with us, what those faces represent is different often than the picture gets presented in the media and in data. Often the caregiver is described as a woman over 50. That's not who we are. We're diverse. We're not defined by our gender, our sexual orientation, our ethnicity, our culture, our religion. We are defined and connected by a value that we hold around compassion and caring for others and being a helper in the world. We all know why we do what we do. We wouldn't choose to do anything different. We want to be there for our loved ones. But it's also important to recognize that the role of co-survivor comes with psychosocial impact, just as it does for cancer survivors. And there's a long list of them. But today, I want to focus on two that tend to be less discussed: grief and guilt. So when I'm trying to understand a concept, I often will go to the dictionary and look up the term just to get clear about what it means. I want you to take a second and read the definition of guilt on the screen through the lens of a co-survivor. So not generally, as you would look at guilt, but thinking as a co-survivor. And ask yourself, have you breached any conduct lately as a co-survivor? Have you committed an offense, especially consciously, as a co-survivor? Probably not. So where does our guilt come from as co-survivors? Typically, it comes from those moments where we judge ourselves, where we feel like we could have done something better, we could have done more. There's another situation that happens sometimes, and often at events like this, where we get to come together and share our stories, which is such an empowering thing. But it's pretty human to slip into comparing and judging our stories and making ourselves feel less than. So I've got some tips for letting go of guilt, because guilt takes our time and our focus and our energy away from the things that we really want to be doing. So let's talk about the power of and. This is a really simple tip, and it's very effective. When we're listening to others tell their story, and then we're thinking about our own story, we connect them with the word and. So in retrospect, we might be thinking, you know, Neil's having a really hard time. His wife's not doing well in treatment. They have 3 kids he's caring for, and he just lost his job. And I too have challenges as a co-survivor. When we use the word and, we connect the stories, and we value both. Both stories are important. It's also a great way to put perspective when you're thinking about yourself and your survivor, because it's very easy as a co-survivor to make our stories less than. It's a different story. It's a different set of challenges. Neither is more or less. When we can frame things with and, we can let go of the judgment, the comparing, and we can embrace both parts. My second tip is forgive yourself. We are our own worst critic. We're very quick to put on the judge robes, get out the gavel, and declare a really harsh sentence on ourselves when we don't show up the way that we want. Instead, what we can choose to do is if a situation hasn't gone the way we wanted it to, if we feel like we could have showed up a little bit better, use the concept of observation. Be curious about what went on that triggered that response in that moment. And be curious about what you might want to do different the next time. When we embrace something like that with curiosity, we have the opportunity to learn about ourselves and grow without the harshness of feeling guilty because of something we've done. Speaking of letting go, Julie talked about that, and she'll give you some great tips on that. So, letting go, there's lots of amazing processes out there. There's body work that can help you let go. There's therapy. There's writing in a journal. Think of what will help you to let go. But I like shortcuts. Every once in a while, you're going to be in a situation where what the opportunity is to just choose to let go. Just choose it. Living on purpose. When we are living toward our purpose and moving our energy from feeling guilty, from looking into the past, from judging ourselves, into what kind of difference can I make in the world right now, or with my loved one, or with my children, when we're living our purpose and our values, we don't have space in our heads to go into judgment. So find out what it is that speaks to you, what calls to you, and remind yourself in those moments where you want to go into judgment and feeling guilty, there's a different way to think about things, and you can put your focus on the things that you care about. And finally, connect. So when we feel guilty, it's quite common to isolate. It's hard to feel good about yourself when you're judging yourself and feeling guilty. It's hard to feel like you've got anything to contribute to a group of friends or a support group. And so the tendency can be to withdraw and go inside. Instead, when we use events like this or the support groups that you can find online and all the great resources of YSC and other community events around you, and we connect with others, particularly if you have a chance to connect with other co-survivors, you start to hear their stories. You start to hear their feelings. You start to understand that to be sad, to be angry, to feel like you want to give up, to want to laugh, or to laugh is all normal. To allow ourselves our human emotions, even in the role as caregiver, is normal. And so when we connect with others, we have the opportunity to validate our feelings. Now, when it comes to grief, typically what we think about is the loss of a loved one. The reality is that any time we go through a major change, there's loss of some kind. Even if we choose the change, even if we decide to buy a new home and move to a new neighborhood, there can still be some feelings of loss over leaving behind friends or family as we move forward. So we don't want to deny those feelings of grief along the way. There's many different pieces and parts of life that we have to let go of when their cancer diagnosis comes to our home. And so, if we can embrace the process of grieving, if we can understand that there will be moments in our days or our weeks where we'll have those feelings of loss, and again, that that's natural, it can be helpful for us. To let go of grief, of course, this is a big topic, and there's a lot of work to be done on it. But sometimes we have to get started with just a few little tips. So first of all, don't judge your process. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. And don't let anybody else judge your process. If grieving to you it's helpful to go out, get dressed up, and go out with a group of friends and not think about what's going on, great. That's what's right for you. Identify what you need. So in order to have the space to grieve, you may need some quiet time. You may need a friend who's a great listener. You may need to see a therapist and do some grieving with that person. Go through and ask yourself, what do I need in those times where I need to let go or to be sad or to be angry about the pieces and parts of life that have been lost at this time? Tip number 3, ask for help. This is a tricky one for co-survivors. We tend to want to put all the time and all the resources and all the energy into our loved one who's going through the cancer process. That's understandable. But what's important to understand is that you actually can be there more sustainably, with more patience, more energy, if you also receive some help. So think about what it is that you need that can help you so that you have the time and the space to feel your feelings, to deal with your grief, and to move through that process. And remember, when you ask somebody else for help, you're giving them the opportunity to feel as good as you do when you give help to others. So the flip of that is, when you don't ask for help, you're actually withholding something from others in life who want to give to you. Number 4 is have the difficult conversations. It's really common, and I did this as a co-survivor, to not want to talk about the scary things. And it's done out of a place of compassion, and it's done out of a place of caring. I didn't want to stir up fears in my late husband by talking about my fears that I might lose him. And so there were unspoken conversations for a very long time, until one day there wasn't. And I got angry about some wet towels in the bathroom. And he had the presence of mind to say to me, "What is this really about? Because it's not about wet towels." And I said to him in that moment, "I'm afraid you're going to die, and leave me alone." And in that moment, he took me in his arms, and he held me, and he comforted me. That was the first time we'd had that conversation, and it gave him the opportunity to support me. He loved me. He wanted to know what I was feeling. So his being able to be present in the now, as Julie was talking about, in that moment, allowed him to listen and hear beyond the anger to the pain, and to help me grieve. Difficult conversations are typically the ones we don't want to bring up, but when we do, there is a connection that happens at a deeper level. There is an opportunity to explore, how do we consciously want to move through this process together at this time? I was at an event a couple of years ago, not a YSC event, just to clarify, so there's no identifying factors. And there was a young couple, and she was in late stage cancer, and they were having communication problems. And so at one point, and this was just the 3 of us, a nice little coaching private session, and I said, "What is it that you feel hasn't been said that you want to say?" And she said, "I've never had the opportunity to talk about what I want for what's left." And she and her boyfriend in that moment connected and opened up and had that conversation. And at the end, she said to me, "Thank you." And they did all the talking. I did nothing. I just held the space. In the end, she said to me, "Thank you. I feel so much better walking out of here today, I feel like he knows what I want. And he said the same thing. Now I can help her. Now I know what's important to her as we move forward through this. Their relationship deepened in that moment because they were willing to risk a difficult conversation. And finally, be kind to yourself. Falls a little bit into the non-judgment thing, but also into self-care. Again, sometimes co-survivors want to reserve the resources for the person going through cancer, which is understandable. But even if you have to get creative and think outside the box, find ways to take care of yourself. There's lots of community organizations that provide volunteers or people that would do reduced rates for services that might help you relax, rejuvenate, and rest. Sometimes love's not enough. There were times I beat myself up horribly for losing my patience with Gary or for being angry about the situation. There were times when I struggled with grieving on my own for things that I was losing, parts of him that I was losing as we were going through it, parts of our marriage and the future that we had dreamed together. So sometimes love's not enough. Sometimes we need tools and resources and support as caregivers. And sometimes it is. The love I had with Gary is strong enough that it allowed me to go through the grieving process, to create a life where I could live beyond what had happened to us and make a difference for other people. And for that, I am truly grateful. Thank you.